We are very excited to welcome a very fantastic panel to speak on this very much needed topic. Before we get going, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'll quickly introduce Project Deep, the organization that's hosting this conversation today. And we'll take you through some of the findings that we have had over the past 3 years for what's happening in the country with respect to direct cash transfers. There might be people who might be already aware of 14, 15 states largely adopting cash transfer models. There might be some of you who might be new to the space. My job here is to bring all of us at a pace so that we can constructively participate in the conversation and we can all follow through the panel discussion. I'll take 10 minutes to go through this presentation and we'll invite the panel immediately. We'll get started with the presentation today. Unconditional cash transfers in India, tracing the journey shaping the future. This is a report that we launched last year. This is a state of the sector report for cash transfers from a government's perspective as to how much cash transfers are happening in India, where we are at, what are the designs, some of these things we looked at. This is a topic where there has been a lot of articles in the newspaper, there has been a lot of conversation going on around, especially during election seasons. What we're trying to do today is build a constructive conversation from the welfare perspective of it. There are a few key questions that we thought we should answer, which we have seen come up during multiple rounds of election cycles, newspaper articles, and then we'll take the conversation forward from there. Quickly introducing Project Deep. Project Deep is creating an ideal welfare stack with the government through two pathways of fiscal prudence and intentional policy design that results in measurable socioeconomic growth for its citizens. We do this by 3 verticals in the organization. We have set up a research vertical, which is our knowledge creation, that creates reports like these, that creates knowledge products specifically for policymakers in the country. We have our community work, where we raise private philanthropic capital and run pilots. We have done 7 pilots across Maharashtra and Rajasthan to test out innovative models for cash-based policies. And we have a policy engagement team that works directly with policymakers. Why are we having this dialogue? Why cash transfers are relevant? Very quick look through to the numbers. 280,000 crores is what we found across 72 schemes in the country that goes directly from government's bank account to citizens' bank accounts today. This is 11% of social sector spending, of the welfare spending of the government, 0.9% of GDP, and this has grown 23x. This number reflects, it has peaked in the last year, 24-25, and this is why we're having this conversation. One of the major questions, because this is linked to election cycles that come up, is cash transfers only politically motivated? Or does it has another role to play? To answer this question, we looked at the origins of cash transfers. The first time this came up at the time of 2008, when the statement, "It takes 3 rupees to deliver 1 rupee of ration in the country," was popularized. Post which there was a DBT mission that was set up to especially address this one specific problem of administrative efficiency in the country. It took us a decade to set up Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile banking setup and get the DBT going. Today, as a country, we can do more than 1 crore transactions in a day. And nowhere else in the world this setup works. That has a fantastic achievement as a country, and we are able to attack the problem of administrative efficiency to a certain extent. In 2018, 2019, during the farmers' crisis, we saw some of the farmer-targeted cash transfer schemes come up in the country. Raitu Bandhu in Telangana, which got taken up by the central government later as PM Kisan, still exists, and multiple states do a top-up on the 6,000 rupees provided by the central government. And what we are seeing now, to 2019 onwards, is women-based cash transfer policies. So this has been a long-term movement that has been building up in the country to address multiple challenges with administrative efficiency, with agrarian crisis, and with welfare and autonomy for women. So this is the history that we looked at to answer the question, is this only politically motivated? Our bet is it has a larger role to play, especially in welfare. What is that role? We'll cover this through the panel that we have, but just to give a few metrics, cash transfers in India, the 280,000, in 24-25, we saw that it has peaked, it has a larger share within the welfare portfolio than the other flagship schemes that the governments have been running, which are the NREGA and the food subsidies, which were the flagship program for poverty alleviation. So it has a higher share in the budget, and hence it becomes more and more important for us to discuss this, do more research, and build a constructive narrative which can help the citizens to make the most of this conversation. Do cash transfers really work? Globally, we have seen when Project Deep started 3 years ago, there have been 300 research studies that GIFT directly had put together. So globally, there has been a lot of evidence. What we have done in 3 years is run our own pilots. The 7 pilots that I spoke about, we have disbursed almost 5.5 crores, but we have data for the 3.75 crores that we have disbursed across 2,400 or 800 households. We have seen assets built up. We do lump sum cash transfers, and people don't necessarily become lazy or waste this money. 89% of the funds have gone into asset building in our own experience with our own pilots that we have done. And then on the side of, we have Tara Krishnamurthy here, who has contributed to one of the studies that we are showcasing here. There have been multiple state-level evidence that has built up, and we see good movement on all of these metrics because of the cash transfer schemes that the states are running. There is emerging evidence, and there is a lot more to go. But a global call is that it really works for some of the welfare. It actually depends on how we design it. FACT, frequency, amount, communication, and timing, is a framework that we have developed to guide programs on ground or policies as well, to design it for a certain specific given outcome. The figure that I showed was large, 280,000 crores, and the ongoing question of where will the money come from? Is this sustainable? Is this fiscally prudent to do? The 2016-17 economic survey and this one reflects that when we move subsidies to cash transfers, that's the only way to fund cash transfers. And the evidence of that was with the first subsidy, LPG subsidy, that was moved to a DBT mechanism. Over a period of time, the country saved 74,000 crores on this single subsidy. So once we make an ideal welfare portfolio, as we go towards an ideal welfare stack, we will realize that there is a lot of inefficiencies that we still have to deal with in the system, and DBT mechanisms make it much more efficient, increases the reach of schemes and entitlements, and make the schemes much more equitable as well. This is just one example. We have been working on agri-electricity subsidy. We have been working on agri-subsidies as well to understand how this mechanism will look like in the coming years. How do we imagine an ideal welfare state? This is not the question that I will answer today, and we have invited a fantastic panel to answer this along with us. I would very quickly invite Dr. Nachiket Moore. Nachiket Moore brings a deep systems perspective to questions of welfare, development, and inclusive growth. He has served on the board of the Reserve Bank of India and other large institutions, including with the Gates Foundation. He is currently associated with the Banyan Academy of Leadership in Mental Health, where he continues to engage with questions of institutional design and social sector systems. Please welcome Dr. Nachiket Moore. Our second panelist for the day, Atul Satija, founder and CEO of the Nudge Institute. Through its work across livelihood, skilling, and social entrepreneurship, the Nudge Institute partners with governments, markets, and civil society to build pathways towards a poverty-free India. Atul has been instrumental in shaping several large-scale initiatives aimed at enabling economic mobility for underserved communities. Project Deep has had a great pleasure to be incubated and now in the acceleration programs of the Nudge Institute and being part of the Nudge ecosystem for the past 3 years. Thanks a lot to the Nudge Institute. And my co-founder and the moderator for today's panel discussion, Pankhuri Shah. Moderating today's discussion, she has a CFA. Pankhuri began her career in the corporate and financial sector before moving into the social impact space. Through Project Deep, she now works at intersection of policy engagement research and field evidence to strengthen the design and delivery of cash-based policies aimed at improving economic mobility for the bottom 20% households in India. On to you.
Hello? Hello? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Muzammil, for starting us off and giving us this really great context as to, why is this conversation important today. And thank you again to Dr. Nachiket and Atul for joining me on this. I'm actually looking forward to the insights that you guys have as well. Muzammil touched upon a few points that I would just like to speak a little bit more about before getting into the questions. One is on just transitioning of subsidies. What does that really mean? The underlying question that we're looking at is, what is the role of the state? What is the role of the government? I think as we look at the history of welfare, we do see that, at the point in time that new tools were introduced, they did play a very significant role in solving certain problems. But as we've grown along the time, the nature of welfare challenges has evolved. The kind of things that we're seeing in terms of shocks, in terms of climate shocks or the geopolitical risks, etc., the nature of challenges is changing. But at the same time, we've also been able to, see a lot of progress in some of the outcomes that we had set out to do. And so that begs the question, do we re-look at what the government intervenes in versus not? And that's something that, we would like when we think about the ideal welfare state or designing for inclusive growth, how do we actually distinguish what are the market failures where the government can intervene, should intervene, and then therefore kind of allocate most of its effort and resources towards impactful instruments and instruments that actually enable inclusive growth. So with that little bit of introduction, I would actually take a further step back and start with you, Atul, to say, as we look at poverty in India today, how do we see the evolution? How do we actually, when we imagine, I know Nat says poverty-free India, as we think of solutions, really, how do you describe the problem in the first place? It's multidimensional, it's complex, but for those who are designing solutions, what are some of the key aspects that we need to focus on?
Thanks, Pankhuri, and thanks for actually using the space. This is the first event we are doing in the Spark Pullur Center, so thank you so much for that. If you think about India's journey since our independence, we were 70% poor when we got our independence 75, 78 years back. And over this journey, we have dropped our poverty rate. No matter how we have defined, definitions have kept changing and evolving. But broadly, we know that as a country, we have made a huge progress in our overall economic growth. And that has also contributed to pulling a large number of people out of poverty. Official NMPI numbers show that we are at about 11% or so, which is a huge progress. Now, if you take 70, 75 years of economic progress, we had Hindu rates of growth, 50, 60, 70, 3, 4%. Now we have seen 6, 7, 8% in the last few decades. And that has pulled, obviously, a very, very large number of people in India out of poverty. But just economic growth is not good enough for meaningful, inclusive growth. You can be a rich country with a lot of poor people. And we see that in India as well. And I think there are a lot of intentional development initiatives that government has taken over a period of time, whether it was a food security-led green revolution, or white revolution, or microfinance movement, polio eradication, UPI. A lot of these things, Aadhaar, a lot of these things are intentional designs to make sure that we are able to build equitable solutions, policies, and that can actually serve a large number of people. So it has worked for us. But given the size of the country, we are nearing 1.5 billion. There is a lot of work for the country to do. And I think while we have to continue focusing on economic growth, and that's a huge imperative, that's our strongest force, but intentional policy designs to actually tackle the people at the end of the line is very, very critical. One thing that I learned very surprisingly after moving to development sector 10, 11 years back is that we have a lot of definitions of poverty in the country and also globally. We have seen below the poverty line, Ati Garibi Rekha is a separate one than Garibi Rekha. We have Tendulkar line. We have global MPI, which is now in India, has its own variant of NMPI. And different orgs use their own definitions. But the reality is when the government schemes are created, very rarely would you see a scheme using any of it. They use identity like, okay, tribals, SCs, STs, PVTGs, or certain religious minorities, or certain geographies, or other such identifiers through which they provide the welfare to the poor. I think from a nudge standpoint, when we think about it, it's very hard to define a line, because that line has to mean different numbers at different places in the country, at different points in the journey of those places as well. I think a qualitative way to think about this is actually well captured in NMPI. But for me, I think it is as simple as saying that, do people have food safety and food security available to them? Do they have housing that they can feel safe in all weathers? We have huge extreme weathers in India. Do they have all weather safe shelter? Do they have access to basic level of education? Do they have an access to basic healthcare? And more importantly, do they have a livelihood that is sufficiently resilient? Nothing is fully resilient now. But is it sufficiently resilient for them to have the mental comfort that they can get by for the visible future? And if they have that kind of resilience, I think it is okay to say, okay, these people who have A, B, C, D, E things are not living in a life of this. But one underlying thing that's very important that we realize is that we meet a lot of people who are not economically poor, but they are permanently in distress. You can call it mental health and many other forms of distress. A good example is we go to Jharkhand, and a lot of women make illicit country liquor there. They make more money than you would call from a definition of poverty, but they do not want to do that livelihood at all. So I do want to add dignified livelihoods coming from a place of certain agency. As long as these things are there, I would say that, look, we have solved the problem if we are able to get to that. 7, 8 years back, when we started going to rural areas, it was common for us to go to a village and see 15, 20% people missing even basic PDS ration. But in the last 6, 7 years, it is very rare for me to go to a village and actually see, beyond one exception here and there, people missing PDS ration. But not just PDS ration, even the other welfare benefits that are transferable directly to the bank accounts not being available. And that's a huge progress we made as a country in the last 7, 8 years. We see that on the ground. And I think the next big challenge for us is how do we ride on top of what Muzammil just talked about, 2,75,000 crores going to the people directly as cash in their bank accounts. What kind of work that you need to do on top of it to build some resilience, safety of income, on top of the sensible use of money that is anyway happening. So.
No, thank you. Hello. Yeah. No, that's, thank you for actually tracing that evolution and breaking down what that progress has been. I think couple of the 2 points that stood out to me is, inequality. Like the country could be growing, but what part of the country is really growing, and how does that translate into growth, development, progress for those who are not automatically included in the growth? Like how do you make that distribution more intentional, more, top of mind for those who are designing some of the architecture that we now see in the country? And the second was about just poverty and distress as well, right? Like poverty has multiple definitions and ways to calculate, but distress or dignified livelihoods, those are things that are more ephemeral, like not necessary that it means the same for different people. So when we think about inclusivity at Deep, we're also thinking about some of these things, which is dignity, agency, choice, and even in terms of livelihoods, right? Like I know the 2016-17 economic survey actually is a fantastic chapter on basic income, which actually starts with saying that in a world where inheritance is real, money is anyway delinked from jobs. So, there's a large part of us who actually come to money without having to work. And then when we talk about cash transfers or welfare, it is often looked at as freebies and, why is this group of people getting money without doing any work? So I think at this point, I would like to bring you in, Dr. Nachiket, more to say, when you think about inclusive growth or inclusive development in that sense, what comes to mind, and, what are the levers of what are the three things that could happen for you to say that, okay, now we are a country that's not just growing, but actually taking along all the citizens as we grow?
Thank you, Pankhuri and Muzammil and Project Deep for inviting me here. And like most of you, I don't work in the social sector that much. My background is much more mainstream finance, Reserve Bank of India. So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective to this discussion. I think a wonderful case for welfare has been made already. But I don't quite think of it like that. And sometimes there is this issue about this versus that. And, we know as a country, we have this Viksit Bharat goal, 2047, $13,000, $14,000 per capita, which is the cutoff to be a developed country. And we need to get there. The reality, sadly, is that while, Atul is right, that we moved from the 3.5% to 6-7%, China grew, just so that one statistic we should keep in mind, in 1990, per capita income of China in India, India was a little bit higher than China. From 1990 to 2023, China grew at 12% per annum, we grew at 6% per annum. Today, our per capita income is $2,500, they are at $12,700. Right? So clearly, there is a growth imperative. And I'm not persuaded that our current strategies add up to the growth narrative that we would all like to, hang on to. I see cash transfers, and this is where the whole inclusive conversation is basically acknowledging that we don't know what to do. You know, because you're consuming, you're eating, you're living. Why don't we, except for some very basic services like healthcare, like primary education, where the private returns are lower than what commercial returns are minimum expected, we will hand over everything to you. And now you will shape the market. And inclusive growth, in some ways, to my mind, does not have to come at the cost of aggregate growth. In fact, if anything, if you're going to get to 12%, we need the Biharis and the Jharkhandis and the UP walas to grow as fast as anybody else has grown. By constantly getting into this task of, I know best, I will build this power plant, I will build this. I think we still haven't got rid of that, what people call the commanding heights mindset. That's not there. And I am actually very pleased. People say politically expedient. Why is that bad? Politicians are appointed by people. It's like saying, I sit on boards. I represent minority shareholders on many boards. I am supposed to act in a shareholder expedient way because that is my role. I got elected by them. I think for the first time you're seeing political experience and economic logic coming together. And the only issue, and I'm sure you'll get to that, is are we getting good design? Are we using this political experience well, or are we treating it as some dirty secret, that we have to do for winning elections, but that's actually a bad use of money. And sometimes I feel that a welfare-oriented argument hurts us a little bit. Because now we look like, left-wing enthusiasts, forever crying, भाई हमने तो poverty eliminate कर दी, आप फिर क्यों, let us focus on growth. But we are saying focus on growth. This is not a trade-off. This is a matter of how do you use money well. So I would say inclusive growth to me means choices and information going to people with money so that they can express what they need through the money that they have and shape the economy.
Saying that, I think earlier Dr. Nachiket had put it very beautifully to me once, saying that justice and growth are both two sides of the same coin. I think I have just kept that with me to say that it's true, right? Like when we're saying take everyone along and that's the just thing to do, it's not antithetical to the larger growth. But the point that you raised about intentional design, and we're already seeing some of the cracks, right, if I may call it so, to say, if I take an example of one of the larger states in the country, which started off with a huge coverage of, over 2 crore women and lots of kind of bigger promises, and slowly the fiscal question comes into place, like, does the state have the money? Can they borrow for schemes that are cash transfers without getting into all of these run-ins and backlash? And that's where even something that may have started off with an intentional design starts to break down. And even in our work, right, we see that there is two kind of big sides when we speak to people. Those that really believe in the agency giving power of cash transfers directly, but also very skeptical and very cautious about the fiscal burdens, etc. And to bring back to the point that Muzammil had alluded to, is that, as a welfare portfolio, if a state government has over 2,000 schemes, that number was staggering to me, right? Like, what organization or what system can actually efficiently run that large number of schemes for such a complex population? You're also not saying that it's 2,000 schemes for a particular group, which led us to the question to say, what is, given our common belief, at least our belief at Project Deep, that cash transfers can actually, if designed effectively, result in multiple outcomes, then what are some of the legacy schemes that were initially meant for those outcomes that can actually be phased out so that we have a leaner portfolio, or a more efficient and equitable portfolio? So I'll actually bring you back on that point, Dr. Nachiket, to say what are, there are some risks of cash transfers actually going down the tokenistic path, because you need to be, for any of these outcomes to be realized, the amounts need to be enough for the outcomes that they're meant for. The timing needs to be, well thought through. And the demographic, we need to move towards more of an inclusion bias than an exclusion bias. So theoretically, we know what needs to be done. But when you think about intentional design, what does your portfolio look like? I know you touched upon it to say public goods like health, education, and then cash transfers. But if we could just deep dive a little bit more on that to say, if we had to just redraw, what does the welfare portfolio of a state look like? What would that be?
I mean, the logic of where is the money going to come from, right? I would start with zero budgeting. I chaired a committee for Reserve Bank of India on financial inclusion in 2013. And we argued that why is the need for credit subsidy? In a labor surplus market, you are subsidizing credit. How does that make any sense? Farmers are getting cheaper credit to mechanize when they should be using a lot more labor. Right? You're distorting market after market after market. Right? We have excess fertilizer production. We have people who are stuck to the land because the only way to get the benefit of the subsidy is to show that I am a farmer actually farming. Why? Much of Indian farming is no longer viable. Right? I want an opportunity to urbanize in a sensible way. We already know from Nightlight's information that Bihar is 70% urban in terms of population density. But it doesn't have the benefits of urbanization because people are still stuck to the land. Why are they stuck to the land? Because of subsidy distortion. Right? So clearly, a part of the well-designed welfare portfolio is get out of the way. Stop distorting these multiple markets that are there. Let market forces figure out where the right opportunities are. And you might say, is markets the right answer? Should we not go back to state planning? But that's a decision we took in the 80s and 90s already. Right? I was a banker then. I remember when I was in ICICI, it took me 7 years to get a fax line. It's a telephone number. Maybe many of you have not heard of what a fax is. It was one of those big things. I still remember the phone number. It was such a big achievement that I was going to put it on my CV. 7 years. And this was the state planning that we were getting. So we have decided that that doesn't work for us. We are going to go down the market way, but we are not fully committed to that. We are still, holding back multiple things that are happening. And in some ways, I would say politically, if it turns out to be more attractive to give farmers cash rather than fertilizer subsidies or credit subsidies, I would certainly celebrate that. Now, the question that implicitly you're asking is, should we make the whole government just cash transfers then? Right? That's a possibility. One could argue, if I look at the welfare theorems, the second welfare theorem says, fairly simply, that in order, the first welfare theorem says, stay out of the way. Markets know what to do. Second welfare theorem says that, well, if there is inequality, and India is the land of inequality, 10% of us are living Scandinavian lives, 90% are living South Sudanese lives, right? So inequality is a problem, just transfer cash to them, and then let the first welfare theorem apply, which is in a sense the core of my argument. Unfortunately though, there are many, at least a few critical areas. I work in healthcare, for example. Right? Healthcare markets just don't work. Why do they not work? Because one big difference between toothpaste and healthcare is when I go to the supermarket to buy toothpaste, I know what I need. When I go to the hospital to deliver my child, I don't know what I need. Now, in that situation, the first welfare theorem breaks down. And which is why you find, for example, in a state like Kerala that has a very good health system, a diabetes, hypertension burden that is amongst the highest in the world. We are risking an epidemic of amputations that might be emerging there. Massive hospital utilization. C-section rates crossing 60%. Do we need 60%? Well, it turns out the science says 15%, maybe 20, maybe 25, 60. So clearly these are markets in which any successful system around the world, the best example of a public sector run developed country system, you'll be surprised to hear, is Sweden. Right? Even a rabid market economy like Sweden has not trusted the market to solve healthcare problems. Same thing is true in primary education. Right? Not in higher education, but certainly in primary education. But there are only a few sectors like this, where I would argue government has not just a financing role, but an actual design role. It may provide if it thinks that's the right thing to do, but there are many countries that have chosen not to provide, working with the private sector to provide. Like the UK, primary care is provided by the private sector, but paid for by the government. The rest of it moves out entirely to this mechanism. In fact, instead of asking the question, justify the cash transfer, I would reverse the question and say, justify the subsidy. Justify why are you building this road? India has the highest road density in the world. The only country that has more than us is France, including rural roads. We are well ahead of China, well ahead of the US, because of the Gram Sadak Yojana that Prime Minister Bajpayee had. We have done it. Now there is no continuing role. In the 1950s, there were no Tatas, Birlas, or they were there, but they were not so large. They couldn't build the power plants and Today, that is not true. We have giants in the industry. They can build anything you name it. They have the ability to do it. So I would take a somewhat extreme academic view and then work backwards to say, justify to me why you need to do this. Show me what is the exact failure, and what you have figured out is the best way to solve it. Rest of it, hand it over to the people.
We do see very, very promising evidence. In fact, recently there have been papers on PM Kisan and on Raitu Bandhu that actually showcase how giving farmers money directly, a substantial amount well-timed, because those schemes provide money right before the sowing season, has not only improved like the crop yield, like the quantity, but also the quality, because the timing of capital is so crucial when you think about a space like farming. And even when you talk about, periodic money going out to people directly, Alaska has kind of eradicated extreme poverty, and they have the longest running kind of direct cash program, which comes from their oil revenue. At this point, Atul, you mentioned that now is the time to kind of ride the wave of the 2,70,000 crore that's already being given, to make sure that, how do you kind of make that money catalytic? Like, what are some of the existing, either private markets or existing even government institutions or ecosystem that has been built to kind of converge so that as a whole, this is something that benefits the citizens. Are there any specific, solutions, ideas that you're already working on or thinking about to say like one is convergence at the state design level, but the other is convergence at a citizen level, right? How does one family actually take all the relevant benefits and use that to kind of accelerate their growth? So any ideas or thoughts on that?
Actually, in development practice, we think we know, but reality is that very, very few things have sufficient evidence that can beat even cash transfers, which means all the work that we do may, even on the non-profit practitioner side, be not relevant if you do actual measurements on it. I think in India, we have large number of non-profits doing grassroots action. And I'm sure there are millions of amazing things that are really working on the ground, but there is no data or evidence to say, here is a model that works and we should figure out a way to scale it. Global development practice has a lot more evidence focus because the nature of capital required to build evidence is more easily available. And they are able to invest that money to say, okay, this works. When you study the evidence in education and health, there is a lot more available. In livelihoods, the area that we focus on, there aren't things beyond 7, 8 that are proven to have the evidence. Smallholder farmers, input and advisory, cash transfers, poverty graduation approach, trail bridges, reading classes for livelihoods. There are like 7, 8 interventions only that have sufficient evidence to warrant putting insane capital behind that to scale it. So in India, while there is a lot of cash transfer happening, unconditional cash transfers done in a manner that it creates impact, I think we still don't know how much of 2,75,000 is actually being put to good use. It is being spent probably more efficiently than a lot of development action, but we still don't know what it does meaningfully. Obviously, it is not wastefully used. Maybe people are buying assets from there, but do these assets lead to income increase 6 years from now? Are they improving their roofs, which is a good use of money? Or are they buying an economically productive asset that increases their income? We don't know. So there is a lot of work required in India to make sure that this wave of capital that's being deployed for cash transfers actually creates the impact that is needed in the household to actually make that work. It's one large part of it. I think at Nudge, we have done a lot of work on what is called the graduation approach, where you bring cash and care together. Governments have gotten very, very good at transferring cash, and non-profits have been very, very good at providing care, but the twine don't meet. A road to a village is not good enough, and a school in a village is not good enough. They both have to happen. A capability and an opportunity both have to come together. Skilled youth without jobs and jobs without the right labor, both don't work. So I think the same way, I think in development, there is more work required to build on top of cash to say what else is missing that enables the families to have a life that they need. And I think this opportunity that we never had before, thanks to the economic growth, India's expenditure budget was like 10 lakh crores in 2007-8. Now we are sitting at 60 lakh crore. That budget for this 2,75,000 crore has come from economic growth. And we have the opportunity with that growth and the capital that comes with that to actually use it in a manner that creates the most impact. And that needs a lot of investment in meaningful pilots on the ground to see what kind of models work that you can then work with government to scale.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. I think that we have seen some interesting models that have come up with the cash transfers as well, right? We know that in one state, for example, the state gives out monthly transfers because that's a viable program. But then rural banks are bought in to actually then provide asset vouchers in lieu of that. So those who want to continue to use monthly transfers can do that, but those who need lumpier investments to either build houses or livelihoods are able to do that. And therefore, the convergence of stakeholders to be able to come together is something that we're also looking at. And of course, I think evidence is a missing part of the puzzle, right? There is today, we understand how many people the schemes reach to, are they spending on consumption versus livelihoods, but completely agree with Atul to say what is then the asset leading to? Like, what is the consumption? Is the consumption actually leading to better nutrition or better kind of growth for children in the families, etc.? I think that kind of data is slightly missing from the Indian landscape. I would say not just for cash transfer. I think evidence is a question across different schemes that the government has, but we are seeing, with so much more interest in this space, I think there is we see a lot of hope and opportunity that people will come in. This has been a really exciting and interesting conversation, and because we've covered a lot of things, and my closing question was also about your vision and stuff, which we have covered. I want to just say, are there any closing thoughts to either summarize your overall kind of vision of poverty-free India or inclusive growth, and a little bit of a call to action to the room, right? To say that if you're a practitioner or if you're a policy maker, what is it that we should be most, keep front and center as we kind of design solutions and work towards the Viksit Bharat goal in our own capacities?
I think for me, nothing new. The only thing I would say is that we as practitioners, if we are able to use our time, energy to actually find the right kind of evidence and pilots on the ground, you can actually shape how lakhs of crores of money that government is putting into the market as cash transfer that can be better spent. Pilots, experiments, models, etc. I think it will inform the evidence-based policy design on this.
I think from my perspective, a kind of meta view is that we must think a lot more about trust. This language of poor people, they don't know, they are illiterate, they may drink it away. I see this everywhere. We have inherited a surveillance state. I work in healthcare. One of the things I find, I have a series of papers on why C-section rates are so high in the public sector. Right? Because they don't make any extra money. Why would they do a C-section? Because we have built such a strong, we've weaponized words like accountability, transparency, so that the doctor says, you asked me for a C-section, I'm going to give you a C-section. Is it good for you? Is it good for your child? I don't know. But if I don't give it and something happens, right, my own system will not support me. So why should I bother? Somewhere I remember reading a newspaper headline, which was an interesting headline. It is not corruption, but the fear of corruption that is actually holding us back. Because we have all become a little bit beady-eyed. And we are saying, oh my God, something is going wrong. There's a conspiracy here. This money is going away. This household is having too much alcohol. Somebody is having too much popcorn. I think we have to change that. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward. We're going to spend too much time checking up on each other. Defensive behaviors are going to become dominant behaviors. When this whole idea of tracking Anganwadis came up, and the whole idea of a surveillance, I need data to hold them accountable. At least in the electronic system, the problem of malnutrition vanished. Everybody said, my child is perfectly well nourished. Why would they say anything else? Right? Because you're going to use that as a weapon against them. Again, I would say this idea of trust, to my mind, is an important issue, and which is why I really like this work that Project Deep is doing, is really starting to think about a different way of imagining how we think about inclusion and development.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think for me, one big takeaway from this conversation has been that fine line between accountability, surveillance versus evidence. So systems can be designed with trust, and we still do need evidence or data to see whether it works or not, but that can be done without making it overly big bossy, like everyone's watching you and you have to perform, but just in a way that it helps to improve the systems but not instill fear in those who they are built for. So I think that's kind of the big summary or takeaway for me from this session. And with that, I would love to thank the two of you for making the time once again and for really engaging so actively with the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.